When I look at the stories that I got wrong during the COVID era, right, and mostly culture war related stories, it's because the media intentionally, and I'm going to say intentionally, omitted incredibly important details of those various controversial stories. The Kyle Rittenhouse story, perfect example of that. I got that story wrong because I relied on corporate media. And look, I have to hold myself accountable, so I'm not saying that to place blame or transfer the blame onto others. I should have done my due diligence and I should have gone out of my way to read from reporters that might have a different perspective. I didn't do that. And now I've learned to really go out of my way to understand the arguments made on all sides.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Leftist Losers Show, where we point out all of the losers of the left. And this morning, I wanted to go ahead and bring up a clip from the PBD Podcast from a few months ago featuring Ana Kasparian. And basically what happened was PBD was able to get her to basically admit that she was in a bubble, an echo chamber, if you will, with regards to where she gets her information. And I think this is a really relevant topic because if you've seen polls, and I know I've seen polls done on Twitter, and I can't remember the sites. I'll have to pull them up. Maybe I'll put them on the screen. But basically talking about how people who consider themselves to be leftists and or like a Democrat tend to only watch leftist leaning shows or read leftist leaning news outlets, whereas people who are more on the conservative side or the right leaning side, like libertarian side, tend to get a diverse, more healthy. I mean, not always. They're still in a bubble usually, but a more healthy, diverse group of information. And I think that's not to say that, you know, right-leaners are better in any way. It's just that I think that the nature of the two sides, you have Democrats who are very based in feelings and how things make them feel. And so they probably lean more towards outlets that are going to make them feel good about what's going on and make them feel like their side's winning. Whereas I think conservatives are more combative in terms of they want to argue ideas, they want to go off of merit, they want to go off of logic. And they don't like people who use their feelings to make decisions, and that's what makes them usually more conservative. And I think that's a big reason why that takes place. But this clip was fantastic because, like I said, PBD basically gets her to admit that she is in an echo chamber and that she has since realized it, and that she just kind of points out why that was. And I think that this happened back around the time she started getting attacked for not wanting to be called a birthing person or something along those lines. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and jump right into this segment, and I'm going to let you guys enjoy it.
Transition into the story that came out yesterday. Americans' trust in media plummets to a historic low. Okay, so this is an Axios story. Americans' trust in media has fallen to a historic low. According to new polling from Gallup, trust in media has previously dropped to 32% in 2016 before rebounding slightly. Those gains have essentially been wiped out according to the poll. Only 32% of the population reports having a great deal or a fair amount of confidence that the media reports the news in full, fair, and accurate way. The only other time in recent history that trust had fallen to 32% was in 2016. In some cases, the sentiment is worse. Today, record high number of Americans, 39% said they don't trust the media at all. That number has steadily increased since 2018. Much of the sentiment dip is driven by Democrats and independents whose collective trust in media has plummeted 18 and 13 percentage points, respectively, from their 2018 peaks. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, before she gives her thoughts, I want to just go ahead and give you my thoughts. I think it's kind of obvious. I mean, you have a media who lied about Russia, and Ukraine and all the impeachment stuff they pushed against Trump constantly. And then you wonder why. I mean, look at the Republican side, 11%. I mean, that's why. Even Democrats, I mean, they're still over half agree with the media, and that's because they usually are pushing their ideas because they're a leftist-controlled organization in terms of the mainstream media. But I mean, even besides politics, I think a large reason or a large portion of the reason for this phenomenon is the internet. I mean, you got to think about it. Look at the CIA's involvement with media going back to the 60s, and you wonder why America became so patriotic. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's probably a good thing for social cohesion and like the stability of the nation. But the reality was the only source of information were the big mainstream outlets. I mean, yeah, you could get your crazy tinfoil hat guy who would get himself a radio and set up like a bootleg radio station and be spouting off crazy stuff that he learned. But I mean, that was basically the extent of what you could consider like something on par with what the internet is. But now with the internet and cell phones everywhere, it's really hard for them to control the narrative, almost impossible. And that's why you see movements like the, misinformation, movement kind of stuff where they're just constantly saying everything's misinformation and don't believe anything you hear unless it comes from CNN. And Yeah, I think that's a big reason for the drop is they used to control the narrative 100%, and all of the trust was put into them because they were the only outlet of information that anyone could deem reliable, and it allowed people in power to get away with a lot of things. And now that they can't, they still operate like they can, but they're constantly in panic mode because everything gets leaked all the time because the internet exists now. And so people are losing their minds. And I think it's going to get a lot worse now that AI is becoming prevalent. I mean, you can go on any video creation AI site that costs I've seen some that cost like $20 a month. And you can generate full-blown videos with AI voices that are fantastic using samples of other people's voices, and it's very hard to tell that it's fake. And if somebody didn't know the person very well, I don't think they would deny that it's them unless they were able to be proven otherwise. So it's scary times. I think we're going to get to the point where people don't believe anything, and that's almost more terrifying because then it's like going back to the dark ages. But anyways, let's continue on with the segment.
Well, I think that the polarization that we're experiencing with the American electorate is reflected in how the media conducts itself. I think depending on what you're watching, you will get only half of the story. So I think that's definitely true of some of the more new media outlets, independent outlets. They cater to a very specific portion of the audience, very specific portion of the electorate. And I think Americans are increasingly realizing, okay, I might be in a ideological bubble depending on what kind of news I'm consuming. So you have that. Then on a more corporate level, if you want to put it that way, corporate media, legacy media, I mean, they've gotten so many things wrong over the years. And I think that all of those mistakes add up in people's minds and it leads to distrust. So I'll give you an example that I think.
Yeah, and real quick, I know I keep interrupting, but I recently saw a segment with I think his name's Brett Weinstein or Weinstein. If I'm saying his name wrong, I do apologize. But he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about just stuff with regards to science because he's a science man. I think he's a mathematician or something along those lines. If I'm getting that wrong, I do apologize. But either way, he's very heavily embedded in the world of science and has a deep understanding of that community. And he was making comments regarding why people in the scientific community he didn't use the word corrupt, but because he was trying to be careful, but basically wondering why are there so many shills in the scientific community who seem to focus more on pushing forward the narrative that the establishment wants rather than just searching for the truth, which is what the scientific community is supposed to be based around, is looking for the truth. And the explanation he basically gave was money. And it's not necessarily that these people are greedy, it's more so the fact that the scientific community now relies heavily on grant money from the government, which requires politicians to, dish that out. So it's almost like lobbyists, like a reverse lobbyist, where the politicians basically push scientists to back them up on the narratives they're trying to accomplish or push forward, if it's a narrative, agenda, push forward agendas. And in doing so, they then allot grant money to these scientific communities. And so that's why a lot of them tend to push, establishment narratives because if they don't make this money, then they no longer will exist. They won't be able to continue that as a career, and they'll have to find work elsewhere. And it's really sad. And he's making note that, back, I think he said in either the 60s or 70s, the scientific community kind of broke away from the military, and that was actually kind of a huge mistake because the military was allowing them to do a lot of work just on their own because the military only cared at the time about, the truth because it needed to fight wars. And so the money coming out of that allowed them to kind of do what they needed to do, whereas now it's so heavily relied on politics that it gets really dirty and murky, and you start getting these corrupt people. And I think the corporate media is similar. Now, the corporate media does have a history of, is it Operation Mockingjay, I believe? It's the operation where the CIA basically got involved and was using it to see if they could control narratives via TV and other means. And I think it's similar in the sense that they get so much money and support and access, probably specifically access, from government entities that allows them to get stories out quickly, like really quickly, that they don't want to lose that. And so they've just gotten in bed with these politicians and they kind of need to, under threat, continue to push forward the narrative because if they don't, then they lose their access. They might lose, I don't know if it's funding, whatever it is. I'm sure it's like being held hostage by the politicians. And I think we see that a lot throughout society, and it all kind of goes back to money. These people need to make money for the sake of, doing what they're doing, and otherwise they can't do it anymore. And so they kind of do whatever they have to, and then it leads to these nasty, corrupt, murky situations where eventually it's just corrupt because it's been corrupt, and they don't see any reason why they should change when they're succeeding. Other than the fact that now independent media like myself, I mean, I'm very new and small, but people like Tim Pool, I'm just saying, an example of people like me who go out on the internet and put their ideas out there and bring forward this kind of information for all of you to consume. We're threatening them and doing very well. I mean, you look at the numbers Tim Pool pulls in alone, or someone like Steven Crowder, and they're just destroying the ratings of CNN, even Fox News, who some would consider to be on the same side as them. So I think those are some big reasons why this is what we're seeing. But anyways, let's let her continue.
You guys are probably definitely going to agree with, but then I'll also talk about it in the context of some of the stories that I got wrong because I relied on legacy media. So in the lead up to the Mueller report, if you were consuming the New York Times, NBC, if legacy media was what you relied on for your information, you were under the impression that without question, the Mueller report will prove that Donald Trump had colluded. There was a big conspiracy between Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Russia. The report did not bear that out. And it was I just felt like I was misled by a lot of that reporting. I felt like a sucker for buying that reporting. So that already was like a major hit when it came to my trust in corporate media or legacy media. Then I saw the way they treated Cenk Uygur when he ran for Congress. The lies they told about him were outrageous. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to believe from them if they are willing to literally take an interview he did with David Duke. That was a super heated interview. Cenk was not friendly to him. I mean, they took a sarcastic comment that Cenk made in the context of that interview, and they reported it as if he was like he wasn't sarcastic, like he meant what he said. And you go back and you watch that interview, you watch that statement, and you're like, no, it's very obvious he's being sarcastic here. So you start losing trust as these, I don't even want to say mistakes. I feel like in some cases, some reporters have an agenda and their agenda becomes clear in their misreporting.
Intentional.
Now, I don't.
And it's kind of ironic that she points out the situation with Cenk. I mean, it's not ironic, but the mainstream media has been guilty of this for forever. And the right is constantly pointing out, again, go back to the Russiagate stuff with Trump, pointing out that this stuff is ridiculous and it's obviously bullshit. And there's so much evidence on why it's bullshit, but people will just spout it endlessly because they read the headline and that's all they read. They don't care about the details of the context. They just read the headline. And however the people who wrote that headline framed it is what it is. And then they'll argue to the ends of the earth that that's the case. And the right, I'm sure, is guilty. That there are people on the right, I'm sure, that are guilty of that too. And I don't know the case that she's talking about with Cenk specifically, like firsthand, I should say. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, people on the right push agendas as well. We can't pretend like we're all immune from that. That's just kind of a human thing, and it's sad. And it does lead us to these situations where people get misinformed because people frame things a certain way and they're lied to essentially, and then they believe things that aren't true. And it all goes back to, again, well, I shouldn't say again, the educational system. If we actually taught people to think critically and not just rely on secondhand information, so like concretely, and pushed the scientific theory, but like the actual scientific theory where we actually, explore theories and ideas and look for that information ourselves, then this would not be as big of a problem. But of course, the educational system doesn't do that. It just makes good little factory workers where kids spend most of their day learning from each other about social shit and getting into, degradation. They just become little degenerates half the time because they're trying to impress their friends and they're not actually learning from adults. And it's a sad reality. And all it does is pump out people who don't care, plug their ears, cover their eyes, and only time they open their ears is when they hear, the mainstream media putting out whatever it is, and then they close them again and la la la, all I heard was this and that's all that matters, and then they continue on. So anyways, let's keep going.
I don't think that's always the case. I don't think that's the case the majority of the time. But when I look at the stories that I got wrong during the COVID era, right, and mostly culture war related stories, it's because the media intentionally, and I'm going to say intentionally, omitted incredibly important details of those various controversial stories. The Kyle Rittenhouse story, perfect example of that. I got that story wrong because I relied on corporate media. And look, I have to hold myself accountable, so I'm not saying that to place blame or transfer the blame onto others. I should have done my due diligence and I should have gone out of my way to read from reporters that might have a different perspective. I didn't do that. And now I've learned to really go out of my way to understand the arguments made on all sides. But if you are relying on one news source, or if you are under the impression that the media outlets that have been around forever are the most credible, the most legitimate, and the most accurate, you will be misled. You really do have to have a healthy, diverse media diet in order to get a better grasp on what's happening in the country and in the world.
And you made
Yeah, and she's not wrong there, and she's starting to kind of lean towards she's not becoming a right winger, right? But she's starting to finally kind of lean towards the center and become somebody who actually takes all of the information in and parses through it and critically thinks about it and realizes that, hey, I'm being lied to by people all over the place on both sides, and maybe somewhere in the middle is where the truth is, right? And that's why I think a lot of the most sensible people tend to be independents, because if you're someone who sits in the middle and listens to both arguments and then critically thinks about it, gives your opinion, I don't know how anyone could disrespect you or think that of course you could be an idiot, but I think that's the most logical, level-headed way that you can approach any situation, right? The tribalism is what's destroying the country, and part of me thinks that the people in power want the tribalism because Democrats definitely benefit from the vote blue no matter who crowd, right? Because they push policies that destroy states. I mean, you look at California, look at New York, they're absolute nightmares, and the people in power are doing nothing about it. They just point the finger at the right, who's not in power in those states, mind you, which makes it hilarious. And they say it's their fault, and it's probably not. But anyways, to stay on topic, I wanted to bring this back up because as we get deeper into election season and we get closer, things are only going to get more tribal. It's always refreshing to see somebody, especially on the other team, away from where you most likely are, who opens their eyes and goes, look, I was wrong in a lot of places because I was lied to. I believed those things blindly. I didn't open my eyes and ears to all the information, and in doing so, I made a mistake. And we have to remember to do that as well, right? And I think a lot of people on the right tend to do that. And, that probably makes it sound hypocritical, but the reality is I think a lot of people on the right are willing to to debate ideas. And that's why you see like the Ben Shapiro types, which Ben Shapiro, I don't know, lost a lot of respect for that guy, but that's another subject for another time. But his kind of people on the right where they want to debate, right? Debate their ideas and aren't scared to do so. But you'll see people on the left who would rather just call you a racist and run and hide and just throw attacks at you and sling mud instead of actually sitting down and have a cordial conversation about what actually makes sense for the country. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this clip. I know I talked over a lot of it. I really wanted to get some stuff out about this. It just, like I said, bring this back up because I think it's extremely relevant for the time, even though it's old. I'm going to go ahead and link the PBD podcast episode where this came from down in the description so you guys can go check out the full episode if you enjoyed it. PBD has been doing some fantastic work. There's been a little bit of drama with him and probably some miscommunication between him and Tim that I don't agree with, but I think that overall he seems like a pretty good guy, and his podcasts at the very least are very informative, and he has some fantastic guests, so please go check him out. Please leave your comments down below on what you guys think about this clip and what you guys think about the situation and what's going on and how relevant this is. I really appreciate the engagement, and I can't wait to provide you guys some more information in the next one. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video later today. Peace.